Hello, my name's Kingsley Singleton, Deputy Editor of Digital Photo. In this introductory video lesson, we're going to take a look at two of the most important tools in Photoshop and Elements. That's layers and selections. Why are they so important? Well, it's their ability to fence off or partition certain parts of your pictures that make them so special. This allows you to make all sorts of alterations to different sections of a photo without affecting the others. And there are plenty of ways that this can be useful, from making simple adjustments like darkening a sky for instance, to more advanced changes like altering the size and position of certain parts of your shot. All of the images open here on screen have been created with a little help from layers and selections, and by following the 4 projects that come after this lesson, you'll pick up all the skills you need to make them. Let's start with the simple stuff though and take a quick look at what layers actually are, how they make up an image, and how different types of selection can help us use them. So let's just close down our example pictures here. And then we'll just open up the picture called layers example.psd and we can take a look at how they function. Now, all layers are controlled via the Layers palette, and you can find that by coming up to Window and down to Layers. Do that and it'll pop on from the side of the screen there, and I'll just undock it so that we can get a better view of what's going on. And then drag out the corner of the palette so we can see all of the different layers that make up this image. Within the palette, all of the layers that make up an image appear in a stack, with visual priority given to those highest in the order. This just means that, unless told to do otherwise, layers towards the top of the stack obscure those below. So, in this example, what perhaps first appeared to be a simple shot of a white snooker ball on a table is in fact an image constructed from several different layers. We can see this even more clearly if I go into the Layers palette and unclick these eye icons, just making those layers invisible and taking us back to a picture with nothing in it at all. So from this starting point, we have our graduated background. We then add a subtle texture. We color the texture. We then add a ball and a shadow to tie it down to the background. And finally, we add a similar color at the top of the palette to help the ball match the color of the table. Now, as I clicked through there, you'll have noticed that there are 2 different types of layers within the Layers palette. We have pixel layers, like the background, and we have adjustment layers, like this hue saturation layer. The first of these, the background or the texture or the shadow or the ball, you can think of as the physical building blocks that make up the image, while the second, the adjustment layers, work a bit more like filters, changing the way that any layers below them appear, in this case turning them green. Both pixel layers and adjustment layers can be controlled in terms of appearance, shape, size, range, opacity and so on, but the really great thing is, because none of these different elements that make up the picture are fixed or locked, they can all be moved around in relation to one another. So, say for instance I want to change the position of this shadow under the ball. I can just click on it in the Layers palette to select it, and then I can click on the image itself to move it around. For instance, I could drag it down and to the left to make the ball seem like it's sitting above the table surface. What I do with this shadow layer doesn't affect the layer above or the layers below. It's controllable independent of everything else. And it doesn't stop with moving the pixels side to side. We can also move them up or down in the Layers palette itself. So, say for instance, for some reason I want my shadow to appear above the ball, I simply click on it in the Layers palette and drag it to the top of the stack. Just imagine that you're looking at the image from above with all of these layers stacked up below you, and you'll be well on the way to understanding how they work. Of course, there are loads of other options within the Layers palette governing how different layers interact with one another. And this shadow layer is a great example. Not only have we changed the blending mode of the layer here at the top of the Layers palette, but we've also changed its opacity, in this case to 60%. Both of these options can be controlled by simply clicking on them and choosing from the different options that appear. So say we want to change our blending mode from multiply to something else, we just give it a click in the palette and the change is made. Same goes for opacity. We can scale this up or down depending on how we want our finished image to look, and all of the control that we need is right here at the touch of a button. It's not just these creative options that come in handy though, there are also lots of ways to speed up your workflow within the layers palette. So say for instance I want to change the size or dimensions of these two layers at the same time. I simply highlight them both, click on the link layer icon, and then I can do just that, making them larger or smaller together and even spinning them around. Likewise, these adjustment layers come in really handy too, because after using them to apply different effects to the picture, they can be clicked again and altered however so you wish. So say we want to change our hue of the table from green to something else. Once again, that's really easy. You'll see all of these options and more used in the special projects that follow this introductory lesson. But after that very quick overview of what layers do and how they come together to make up an image, let's now turn our attention to selections. So while layers are the building blocks that make up an image, selections are really the tools used to craft them, a bit like using a pair of scissors to cut a piece of paper into the right shape. The main selection tools are found near the top of the toolbox, and these can either be used to make very broad sweeping selections, taking in big chunks of the canvas, using tools like the rectangular marquee, for instance, or you can make more refined and accurate selections using the lasso tools, like the polygonal lasso tool, for instance. We can just click around and make our selection in whatever shape we like. Other ways of making selections include using more automated options like the Magic Wand tool or the Quick Selection tool, and much like the other tools in the Layers palette, we'll be using a variety of these selection methods to create the pictures in this month's project. Just quickly though, let's make a couple of changes to this image using selections, and then you can see how they get used in tandem with the Layers palette. So first I want to get rid of those selection I've just made. I press Ctrl and D on the keyboard to do that. And then I'm going to draw a simple line through the image as though it appeared on the table. Let's do that simply by very quickly clicking and drawing out the line. Something like that should be fine. As soon as you complete the selection, marching ants will show where you've made it. Then, because I want to add this line onto a new layer, I need to make one first in the Layers palette. This can be done in a number of ways, but the easiest is to press Ctrl and Shift together on the keyboard and then press the letter N. This will give us an option of naming our new layer. I'm just going to call it Line. Click OK, and there it appears within the Layers palette. Next, I'm going to fill this selected area with white, so we come up to Edit, down to Fill Selection, and pick white from the list. Click OK, and there it appears on screen. Now we can get rid of those marching ants just by pressing Ctrl and D again, and you can see very quickly how that new layer is interacting with the rest of the image. It's sitting below the ball and shadow layer, but above the texture and the graduated background. And then, just as with that shadow layer, I can then change the opacity of the layer, just dragging that down to about 30% or so, just to give me the kind of effect that I want. It's not quite right though, because I also want it to be affected by this adjustment layer, the one that's turning the table green. All I need to do then is drag it below that layer in the Layers palette, just like that, and immediately that's looking really good. Of course I can also change the blending mode of this layer, just as I did again with the shadow layer, just by clicking up here, and this time we'll set it to something like soft light, just to give a very subtle line across the table there. And of course, as I said before, because none of these separate layers are locked, they're all able to be edited at any time. So if I then want to increase the opacity, for example, I just go straight back in there and bring it up to about 50%. And if I then, for example, want to add a little highlight to the top of the ball, it's back over to the selection tool, hold the mouse button down on that one to pick the elliptical marquee tool, and we can just click and drag that out roughly where we want it. Once again, create a new layer with Control, Shift and N. This time we'll call it Highlight. Back up to Edit, down to Fill Selection, choose White again from the list, and get rid of those marching ants. This time though, the problem is we can't see it. Of course that's because it's down below the ball and the shadow in the layers stack. So let's click and drag it up to the top, and then enlarge it a little so that it's visible on the top of the ball. Something like that should be okay. And then, because it's on a separate layer, of course, we can just blend it in using a tool like the eraser tool, for instance. Just giving it a soft edge and a nice little highlight there. Okay, so that's a brief overview of how layers and selections work together, but what about using them on more photographic subjects? Well, let's just bring up our next example picture, and you'll see just how easily they can be used to make great images. Just move our layers palette over to the side a little bit and reduce it in size because we're using fewer layers in this case. And there we go, that's looking pretty good. So here the image looks a lot more advanced, but actually it's made in just the same way. We have a background layer that forms the base of the image, and then we simply add a number of different silhouetted images to make up the rest of the image. All of these different elements exist on different layers, and therefore once again they can all be moved around or resized to suit however you want your composition to be. So say we want to move our church over to the left a little bit, our tree over to the right. It's all very quick and easy, and we can resize them independent of one another. That's no problem either. And we can rotate them, and we can do exactly what we want to any part of the image we choose. All of these tricks and the ability to make multi-layered images will become second nature once you complete the projects that follow this lesson. But before I leave you, there's one other very important thing to know about layers and multi-layered images. If you want to stop working on an image but return to it later, keeping all of those different layers intact, it's really important that you save it as a Photoshop file that's a .psd file, not a JPEG. JPEG files can only contain a single background layer. So when you're saving, come up to File, down to Save As, and make sure you choose the format called Photoshop. These files will be much larger than JPEGs, but that's because they contain a lot of extra information. If you are done working on your image, to take it back to a single background layer before saving, just come up to Layer and down to Flatten Image. And if you keep your eyes on the Layers palette there, as soon as I hit that, it collapses all of those separate layers into a single background layer. And you'll quickly see then, if I try and click and drag on the image, we get an error message saying the layer is locked. We've lost our multi-layered status, we're back to a single layer, so we can't move those elements around independently. Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed that brief introduction to layers and selections, and I hope now you'll get straight on with one of the 4 creative projects that follow this lesson. Give them a try using the start images on the CD, and you'll quickly and easily pick up the skills you need to make your own collages, montages and composites, and end up with a stack of really great digital photos. Okay, see you next time.